Well, we can get started. So the general theme is we're going to follow the Prajnaparamita course with a course on the Mahayana, but at the moment we're going to be looking at Nagarjuna for a while. And Nagarjuna is a famous Buddhist teacher of the 2nd century, very long time ago. Famous for his commentary on the Prajnaparamita and for developing the the middle way philosophy. And we're going to go through his main text, I think, because it's so far removed from current reality that it tempts me to do so. This, philosophical text from like 150 AD, arguing about categories of what's real and not real. So I think it's just the perfect antidote to take our mind off current affairs. And it actually is intelligible. But the particular text we're starting with is the Nagarjuna's great treatise on the Prajnaparamita. And I guess it's called great because, as I said last week, it probably, if fully translated, would run over 1,000 pages or more. Which is interesting because Nagarjuna is actually a fairly concise writer. He doesn't waste words, particularly in the when we get to the Karika, the verses on the middle way. Those are very tersely written. And that when you write things very tersely, which is the Indian philosophical style, then you give space for commentators to elaborate on the meaning. And so you get all this great commentarial tradition over the centuries. It occurred to me as I was reading the translation that I have, which was this particular text, the great treatise on the Prajnaparamita by Nagarjuna, as I said, has not been translated in full. Part of it was translated in like 1950s by this Indian scholar who knew Sanskrit and Chinese called Ramanan. And his book is quite readable and his commentary is very intelligent. And last week I was reading his commentary interspersed with quotes from Nagarjuna. And as I continued to read it, I realized that it would be easier if I got rid of his commentary, as good a commentary as it was. The more interesting part was Nagarjuna, because here I was getting right to the text. And this particular text, well, it may not exactly be by Nagarjuna, it's by someone who's in his vein of thought. And it was also a very ancient text. It was translated into the Chinese in the 4th century AD. So it's actually surprisingly intelligible for all of that. And I think it speaks well on its own. And that's why I just took out the commentary so we get this kind of straight voice of Nagarjuna speaking. So last week I read a section about ignorance and knowledge, which is in the collection that I sent to you tonight of all the Prajnaparamita texts that we've been doing and more. The one I want to read now is from the beginning. I want to go back over these 5 eyes of wisdom, just reading what Nagarjuna has to say. Because you get sort of Nagarjuna, even though we're not getting into all the verses, all of what Nagarjuna wrote, we get enough of it to piece together his view. Now the 5 eyes, just because this is not in a strict order, There's the eye of flesh, which is the ordinary eye that sees the phenomenal world through our senses, human eye. Then there's what they call the Deva eye. And the Deva eye Deva means God, so the eye like a God. And that is what sees cause and effect. It sees causality. Now, in the mythology, the gods are able to see all sorts of causality of all sorts of things. In our case, it's simply the idea that you have this eye that knows cause and effect. Now, if you don't know cause and effect, then you can accomplish whatever you want to accomplish and avoid misfortune. So it's very useful knowledge. In fact, it's what takes you to the God realm. There's a second of add something called Galaxy Tab here. Sure, this. Hello?
Hello?
Oh, we'll continue. So the five eyes of wisdom. The first eye is the fleshly eye, the human eye, which sees the physical world. The second is this Deva eye, which sees cause and effect. The third eye is the eye of wisdom, which sees things as they are in reality. It's the eye of non-dual eye. It's the eye of sees it experiences ultimate reality in its primordial nature. And then there are going to be two more eyes you can introduce that we didn't talk about last time. One is the eye of Dharma, which they'll talk about. It allows you to understand individuals so that you can guide them on the path. And then the fifth eye is going to be the eye of the Buddha. So I'll just read the Nagarjuna text, and then after I coffee before I even start. And then we'll talk about it a little bit. On the five eyes of wisdom. The Bodhisattva already has the eyes of flesh and has partially even the four other kinds of eyes. But these eyes are covered up with the dust of the limitations of ignorance, passion, and hatred, and are therefore unclean. For example, a mirror is by nature bright, but due to dust on it, its brightness cannot be seen. If the dust is washed away, then it shines bright as ever before. All the five eyes of the Buddha arise from Prajnaparamita. The Bodhisattva, while cultivating Prajnaparamita, purifies his five eyes. The eyes of the common people are capable of only a partial seeing. They see the near but not the distant. They see the external but not the internal. They see the coarse but not the subtle. If they see the east, they cannot see the west. If they see this, they cannot see that. If they see the arising, they cannot see the dispersion. If they see birth, they cannot see death. Ignorance and wisdom are neither identical nor different, nor is the ordinary different from the divine. For the ordinary is, in its true nature, divine, and the divine appears nowhere else than in the ordinary. In ultimate truth, there is no difference between them. In ultimate truth, all the different views disappear. All the activities of mind return and enter space, and there is no other sphere for the mind to reach. There, all words cease. The world is itself beheld in its true nature as nirvana and not anything different. It is this wisdom by means of which one realizes this ultimate truth that is called the eye of wisdom. If the Bodhisattva should see exclusively the created world with all its defilements, then they would just fall a victim to the false notion of existence. But if they would see exclusively the uncreated, the transcendent, the undefiled, they would just fall a victim to the false notion of non-existence. Abandoning these extremes by means of the unerring wisdom, the Bodhisattva fares on the middle way. This is the eye of wisdom. Realizing this eye of wisdom, one puts an end to all defilements of anger and desire, to all elements of ignorance, general and particular, to everything that owes its being to ignorance. People lose their eye of wisdom through ignorance, confusion, doubt, hatred, desire, and false notions. But when they realize prajna, then the eye of wisdom becomes clear again. The common people, owing to their kleshas, see only through the eyes of flesh, which yield the 6 kinds of sense cognition. Thus they see things as each with its own nature and different from all the rest, and thus cling to them. But if one will see things through the eye of wisdom, then one will realize that all these determinate entities, seemingly separate entities, are unreal, and that nirvana is the only true reality. The eye of Dharma is so called because it leads everyone, all, enabling all to enter the Dharma. It allows one to understand in what way, by what means, each individual should be helped according to his own mental capacities and aptitudes to realize nirvana. When the Bodhisattva becomes a Buddha, all the other 4 eyes, the eye of the flesh, the Deva eye, the eye of wisdom, and the eye of Dharma, that allows us to see others, all these enter the Buddha eye, where they lose their original names and are called only the eye of the Buddha. This is like the 4 great rivers of Jambudipa losing their original names when they enter the great ocean. The eyes of flesh are born from actions associated with kleshas, afflictions, defilements, and prompted by afflictions, and therefore these are false, untrue. The Deva eye arises from karmic conditions like trance states, and therefore even these are false and cannot see things as they are. Even the eye of wisdom and the eye of Dharma are not completely pure, as in them traces of kleshas are not extinguished, and therefore even they should be abandoned and transcended. But in the eye of the Buddha, there is no error, no impurity whatsoever, for in it all impurity has ended. The eye of the Buddha is the eye that is completely free from passion and is saturated with unbounded compassion for all beings everywhere. It is the eye of wisdom itself come to consummation. When the Bodhisattva becomes the Buddha, the eye of wisdom comes to be called, in turn, the eye of the Buddha. As ignorance and other kleshas, including even their traces, will all have been concluded, one gains a clear comprehension in regard to everything. When one gains the eye of the Buddha, nothing remains unseen, unheard, uncomprehended, and unrecognized. So that is Nagarjuna writing about the 5 eyes of wisdom. And it is interesting, as you would think that when you reach the eye of wisdom itself, where you see the ultimate nature of things, that should be sufficient. But of course, in Mahayana path, the path is inexhaustible, so there's always more. Here, there's the further eye of this sort of, having seen ultimate nature, you then are able also to completely see relative nature. That is, you see the relative nature of individuals, their particular situations, their particular qualities, their particular sufferings, and how they could be brought on. Classically, it's in the text that says how they can be brought onto the path. So you're able to kind of understand the individual situations of things and individuals specifically, so that you can liberate them. And then that, plus these other eyes, once you have that, which is your kind of compassionate bodhisattva activity, liberating other sentient beings, then you have the ability to become fully a Buddha. And the Buddha then has all of these eyes. He has the eye of wisdom, but he also has compassion. And the eye of compassion and the eye of wisdom are joined at that point. Of course, the Buddha has a human eye, and he also completely understands cause and effect as well. So all the eyes of wisdom, the 5 eyes of wisdom, are all present and active in a Buddha. So the suggestion here is obviously that just become a Buddha. And it tells us how you do become a Buddha. And a Buddha is someone that is completely free of passion and is saturated with unbounded compassion for all beings everywhere. So that is the kind of quality that further lifts the bodhisattva into a complete expression of enlightenment. We also get a classic piece on the middle way mixed in here. When he says that it's not quite having anything to do with the eyes per se, but he says, if the bodhisattva should see exclusively the created world with its defilements, in which there seem to be many now, then they would just fall victim to the false notion of existence, that everything that appearances are real. Specifically, I mean, there's levels of appearance. There's what the media tells us, that level of appearance, which some of which we believe and some of which we don't. Hopefully, most of which we don't. But some of it is important to believe, and some of it's not. So there has to be some kind of discerning among appearances. But that's a level, and then how to believe it is another question. But that's the level. If you're too focused on everything has to be have a physical reality. There can't be anything subtle. Everything taken literally, and the created world, then the sensual world is taken as something that exists. That is off one side of the middle way. But on the other hand, it says, but if they would say exclusively the uncreated, the transcendent, the undefiled, so that, having gone into the inner world, sort of leaving the outer world to its ways, one goes into the inner visionary reality that is possible for a human to do, and search out the uncreated, the transcendent, the undefiled, all those things that actually I'm quite fond of and I do search out. And then, but if you were exclusively in that realm, then you would fall victim of the idea that nothing exists. This was a problem in India more than it would be a problem for us. It's really hard to imagine metaphysically having a problem believing that nothing exists, because it's very hard, actually. The modern world is too intrusive to allow that kind of a sentiment. What's more common in the modern world is not a metaphysical nihilism, that nothing exists. It's a moral nihilism, that nothing matters, where that everything is corrupt and everyone is corrupt. So it doesn't matter if I'm corrupt, because everyone else is corrupt too. And the only difference is that the stronger corrupt person wins. Sort of a kind of Darwinian view of the underworld, which is kind of the current Republican view of things. And the weak die along the way. And if the weak can't work and make the economy work and make rich people richer, then we have no use for them. So that kind of moral nihilism is modern, huge modern problem. But the kind of metaphysical nihilism that might have been possible among Indians who were, in trance states contemplating Brahma all day long. We don't have that luxury. So not too much trouble there. But this idea of a middle way is now this idea of neither believing in what you see nor not believing in what you see. And that's going to be the kind of interesting dance that will get reinterpreted in Yogacara, and Tantra, and Zen. What's real and what's not real, how are things real, how are things not real, and so forth.
That really sets up the Yogacara and the real in the moment aspect.
Yeah, you naturally have to go for the answers right there. So you can see where there's this gap though. Nagarjuna does it by saying, well, you've got ultimate reality, which is indeterminate. Indeterminate means here you can't say anything about it. You can't, and particularly in words. You can't even conceive it. It's inconceivable, ultimate reality. And then on the other hand, you have conventional reality. And conventional reality is sort of like social reality, because well, the problem, there's a lot of problems with this. It's good in a simpler kind of way. if all you're trying to do is get people out of conventional reality and to realize there's a transcendent dimension to everything. But then philosophically and practically over time, you get into these problems with certain kinds of questions. As Joe brings up, well, what is real, what isn't real, and what if I'm not with other people? What if I'm just out in nature? Is that real or not real? And so the Yogacharans, and then of course you're going to answer that question, as Joe said, by suggesting that things in fact are, the phenomenal world is real, but it's real only in the moment. Everything we think about the phenomenal world, all our concepts and descriptions and narratives about the apparent world are made up, they're fictions. But the world itself, in the moment that we're experiencing, that experience is a genuine experience. And so ultimate reality is still ultimate reality, and conventional reality is still convenient fictions or not so convenient fictions. But there is also this real moment of the experience. And that's, so that kind of helps the question a bit.
Bruce, another, so we've got moral nihilism, but there's also this just complete materialism, which can feel like a transcendent nihilism. There is no transcendent. I feel like those are related in different ways. Are they part of the same cloth, or are they different in substantial ways?
Well, materialism is actually not nihilism. It's the opposite of nihilism. It's eternal. The classic thing is eternalism and nihilism. So eternalism is the view that things are solid and they exist and they're separate and they have continuity and that you can kind of they somehow secure you or affect who you are. So that kind of literal belief in things and the value of things and the things, and then abstractions of things like money. And the whole idea of value is all corrupted by that kind of literalism, that materialism, that eternalism. Nihilism is the opposite. It's believing in nothing. Now, a moral nihilist could also be a metaphysical eternalist. I mean, in fact, that's kind of the combination you have in the Republican Party. You've got moral nihilism, both among the evangelicals and among the politicians who are basically corrupt to the core. But then you also have they both have their eternalist side, their literalist material side, where one of them have rock hard beliefs and the other have a rock hard love of money. So but they both have their rock hardness, and they both have their kind of fictional reality. So they're kind of full blown cases of where the fleshly eye goes bad, I guess.
What
happens when the fleshly eye has serious cardiacs and you're near blind?
What about like scientific materialism that completely cuts out any vertical transcendent dimension from life? That seems like a nihilism more than an eternalism in a lot of ways, because even scientific materialists will, like matter's just this empty space with these little energetic things going around.
Yeah, they go both sides on that, I think. I mean, scientists intend to where they can run the spectrum between nihilism and the eternalism. Some of them have a kind of materialistic like Carl Sagan. a kind of materialistic mysticism, where he kind of was very excited about the fact that there might be aliens out there or something like that. So it's not really transcendent, and it's more wacko than transcendent, but but he had that kind of thing, and people get like other biologists who get excited about trees and plants and all of that, and nature. I mean, sometimes you get a side of science that kind of glorifies the physical reality which they work with. So they can run to kind of a mild mysticism, or they can be cold-hearted, moral, Darwinian. and of course, you got to understand a lot of people with science backgrounds and tech backgrounds are hoarding themselves out major to all kinds of nefarious enterprises. So science has a problem there where it's not always put to constructive purposes. Speaking of, say, Dow Chemical.
There really doesn't seem to be any transcendent in American culture. No room for it.
No room for what?
Transcendent. The transcendent, or the vertical, or the...
Well, we live in a mysticism-denying age, with a lot of pressures on the contemplative life. At the same time, great opportunities for the contemplative life, because one thing, we're all staying at home. Terry just finished a 3-day retreat, and it was like, what day is it? I mean, you don't even know. It's not. I mean, you could probably slip in 5 days, 4 or 5 days slip in retreats all the time now. So I have quite a bit of opportunity to practice. Nobody's, I don't think, a rare person who does it, but we have plenty of time. And similarly, we could also be improving ourselves in terms of our understanding of things.
Thank you.
There was a great quote. In the age of Nagarjuna, you have to understand Nagarjuna, when you're living in the 2nd century, you're living in classical India. Classical India is like classical Rome. I mean, you're talking about a great empire in its great day. And I mean, they had, in a code of behavior and conduct that was, higher in so many ways than what exists today. And it was also a very stable culture. There was a period, just like the Roman Empire, where you had, there were minor disruptions all the time, but there was, 4, 5, 6 centuries of pretty solid stability, which is rare in history. And similarly, in India, there was a period of a few centuries around the same time that were quite stable. So in the earlier talk I gave on knowledge and ignorance, Nagarjuna says, when he talks about the different kinds of knowledge, and of course the best knowledge is prajna, knowledge of ultimate reality, but he speaks well of the first 2 types of knowledge, and he calls the first one skillful knowledge of cultural matters, the wide acquaintance with things like literature and the arts, the knowledge of benevolence, how to perform religious rites, and so forth. Now, this is a person from a great age, a classical age speaking. It's not enough just to be a Dharma master, but a Dharma master or a Dharma student should know music, literature, arts, history, science. I mean, you should be a well-rounded, educated person. You should know the arts and manners of benevolence. You should be skilled in the arts of religious rites. So you should be a well-rounded knowledgeable person. And so this is a different kind of, this is a very interesting idea. And Nagarjuna is a very traditional conservative sort of person. He believes in bodhisattvas, working their way through the path. Of course, they've got the guiding light of prajna, but there's still, a path of virtuous activity to be trod here. Most of us here are a little old for virtuous activity, but this will play better tomorrow when I'm talking to the Zen group, because they have younger people. So they have decades of possible virtuous activity ahead of them.
I hope I have decades left.
What?
I hope I have decades left. At least 2. But
I would like 1 decade, but right now we're trying to get through this year online,
Right.
Those of us who are in that group that's the mortality rate seems to be particularly severe. I don't know what it is worse to sort of die quickly or be one of these people who after 500 days on an incubator, he came out alive. I think I don't want to be that story. I don't care.
That sounds rough.
So we're going to do our Sunday group at this Sunday, right?
Mm-hmm. The same Prajnaparamita and White Tara that we had done previously. Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah, that Sunday service. Do you have a kind of a PDF?
I can send that back out. Yeah.
Yeah, and then I'll talk off one of the texts in the PDF booklet I just sent out.
So should I send that whole booklet out?
But I'll remember and let people register.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep. I put it on. So the Victor from the Temple Buddhist Center. Every time he's on the email list, but he keeps on saying, "Why don't you post on Facebook?" And I've just kind of not been doing that. But this time I did it. That way he puts them as a co-host, and it reaches more people. So there are a couple emails of people I didn't know.
Well, the one this Sunday is it's as accessible as we get.
Yeah.
Which is not terribly accessible, but not too much esoteric stuff that we're going to cover. So it's fine if a couple of people come.
Bruce, I was also thinking about, you had mentioned like the Peaceful Deities Sadhana compilation and doing like, I don't know if it would be Abhisheka or just Lung, or online Lung of the whole set of them. Like
It's on the list of projects.
Okay.
There's a few in front of it.
Okay. Just thinking about it and thought I'd ask. If I can help. It sounds very good.
How long in camp? the 100 sadhana in camp. Straight sadhanas.
Okay.
But yeah, once I get the book together, let's say we have 100 sadhanas, and we have the book together, then we can do the 100 sadhana transmission. And of course, we'll have to do it straight out. And probably might take, 24 hours, 48 hours. We'll have to have several different leaders because one person can start, but then, when they fade, then we'll have to get somebody else in. They have these, the Tibetans actually like that sort of thing. And I never did one of these, but among some of Kusum Lingpa's followers and students on the West Coast, they were very fond of things they called drupchins, if you remember. And these drupchins sounded like some of them were nonstop, 3-day practices, where they did it in 4-hour shifts where they were reciting stuff, and different teams would come in and do 4 hours.
Is that where the
I think it's more interesting if the same team stays for 24 hours, 48 hours, even if they're not all conscious. You could be able to try that on Zoom, so you just can.
Is that where they basically cook up the Amrita, or they infuse it, they gather all those substances together and mix them and infuse them with mantra for all those days and days? And the drupchins?
Well, yeah, depending on what the particular sadhana calls for. Our book will not be quite that like that, because most of ours are more peaceful sadhanas, but
Bruce?
yeah.
Oh, okay. Didn't know if I could be heard. No, I just wanted to ask about what might be some practical use or uses for these types of ideas and concepts. Like I don't know really. Maybe, for example, how they might be of interest in looking at considering how we react to events that we encounter, situations in our daily life, or I don't know anything like that. Practical, how it relates to our living.
Well, one of the Prajnaparamita texts, it's actually, I think it's in the Diamond Sutra, where it talks about the world to be regarded as an illusion, as a bubble, as a mirage. And it has there's 17 famous similes or something like this. But one of the, we'll go on to a couple of the key implications of Prajnaparamita. But one of them is just a little bit of distancing from appearances. That particularly even more, not so much distancing from appearances in their pure momentary splendor, but from our ideas about things. Our ideas about things are fictional. And we're going to go into that. I mean, deeply fictional. Names are fictional. Concepts are fictional. Constructs, all mental constructs are fictional. So you think fictional, that means, no Democrats, no Republicans, no scientists, no, all these things, wherever you're seeing an idea crop up, or a concept, or some alarmist thing, there's a name or a category or a concept there. And Nagarjuna is essentially, 2,000 years, no, not quite 2,000, but 1,700 years before Wittgenstein. He's questioning the whole idea of language. and how language and our belief system and our ideas and our emotions about our ideas and our fixation on beliefs are getting us into, all kinds of difficulties. So you apply that to current affairs, and my God, it's so obvious. You've got a large percent of the population that's extremely delusional. All of us are a bit delusional, and but parts of the thing are just like totally. I mean, denying that fire is hot. I mean, it's almost that level. So drinking bleach. I mean, so in a world of such incredible delusion, I think this idea that we don't have to we could be free of all that is tremendously powerful. And so it helps us look at all those aspects of our lives where we have fixated belief. I mean, that's the personal application of these teachings. Where in our lives are we fixated? And how can we see the unreality of our mental fixations?
Yeah. You had a good eye.
Yeah, you need a good eye.
Okay, thank you.
Has anybody been watching ESPN put out a 10-part documentary about the 90s Chicago Bulls called The Last Dance? I don't know if anybody has caught any of those episodes.
One here.
I haven't.
That's where this came from. I was reading these articles about Pippen and Jordan, and I thought somebody had written a book or something, but it was a documentary.
Yeah. There's a lot of stuff that's come back out. Like it's gotten a lot of coverage. I mean, it couldn't have come out at a better time. Kind of like the Tiger King or whatever on Netflix. I mean, everybody's stuck at home, so everybody has time to watch a 10-part documentary. But it's really good. I came of age in the 90s. I was in high school in the 90s during the heyday of Jordan's run, and so he was always kind of like a hero figure for me growing up. I mean, it didn't get much better than him as far as reaching the apex of athletic performance and all that. But it's a really good case study of him. But there's one scene there where they're interviewing one of his biographers, and he said something pretty interesting. He said, it's not his ability to jump really high or his, the precision of his shot that separated him from other basketball players. It was that he was utterly present at all times, like on the court. And, he said, the guy even said, people meditate for decades or go to ashrams for 20 years to get to that point of just total, utter presence that, he demonstrated. And, but there's also a bit of I had watched the video after your last talk last week on Prajna Paramita, and you talked a lot about identity and the solidity of identity is kind of dragging us down and away from the transcendent. And there's a contrast in Jordan where he is this utterly present figure on the court and totally in the moment, but yet at the same time he's got this giant ego and this giant identity. Like he's was the most famous person in the world for at least a decade, So I don't know. There was just such a contrast there with his story. But I often think I'm starting to think of the spiritual path as being sort of a shedding of, emotional and mental debris that forms an identity. And, whereas the conventional life, it's all about accumulation of titles and experiences and skills, and just how there's that conflict there. So I don't know. It's not really a question.
It is an interesting phenomenon, and I particularly use the analogy of a basketball court, because it's true. The best Michael Jordan had it, but other basketball, you have to have awareness of this whole basketball court. So it's a fantastic meditative achievement. And a lot of people, of course, have natural ability, including in meditation, obviously. And yeah, his ability to take in a whole court, so without even looking, he knows where everyone is. And of course, you're going to be a football linebacker or a defensive back. You've got to have that kind of vision too. And a lot of sports, you have to be able to, take, soccer players, you got to take in this whole field. And it's a particular kind of awareness, specific kind of awareness, specific kind of mix of sort of focus and yet, a bit wide range. But I think it's kind of unique to often unique to the specific situations that they're in. So Michael Jordan might be, totally aware and selfless and completely present on the basketball court, but when he's in front of the press afterwards, he's Michael Jordan with his narratives and lost in his mythical imaginings and so forth. So I think that's the difference between a sports person and a meditator. Meditator is going for the all-round awareness, not just simply in one aspect of one's life.
When so when I just over the years, when I practice, all that falls away, and then I get up, and then some of the narratives chime back in. So trying to generalize out from formal practice, but that's more difficult.
I think if you just leave the narratives alone, they just sort of eventually kind of disappear. You don't have to do anything particularly with them. I mean, generally a narrative is something that has to be fed quite a bit. So if you're feeding a narrative, you'll be aware. If you have any kind of awareness, you'll pick up on that. And feeding a narrative is a nasty business because it takes all your time. You got to be tweeting from morning to night. You still can't tweet enough.
Stop the meeting.
I mean, what is it? Doesn't he like hit 400 tweets or something ridiculous like that? I mean, I don't have 400 thoughts in a month, let alone, in a morning while, I'm getting ready to, I mean, that mind, like a
I think he's
pinball
pretty
arcade.
prolific on the weekends. Yeah,
What?
I think Sunday is his big day.
Oh, is that? He's meditating.
Yeah.
I mean, the pinball arcade, like, with all the pinball machines going on.
Yeah, good analogy. There's a rumor they're taking him down to Camp David on weekends just to keep him away from his Twitter account.
No Twitter at Camp David. Huh?
I don't know. take him there to feed his ego.
So you could drink quinine in secret. Hydrochloroquine.
Yeah.
So we're gonna move on to La Carica's, is that?
Possibly, or we may do some more from here. It depends. I have to go through the chapters and pull all the quotes out like I did here and type them all up, and it takes a bit of time. So if I can-
Is there a particular translation that I've got Garfield's?
Oh, I haven't looked at Garfield's. I'm sure Garfield's is good. I have Ineda's. It's from 1970. He was. It's also good. Those are the only two I know. I have some commentaries in addition to that. But, yeah, I think some of the parts in the Maha and the treatise are easier to understand because it's a bit more conversational. He's more in an explanatory mode. In the Karikas, in the verses, as I said, he's in this kind of technical Indian philosophic discourse mode. And so you make a lot of cryptic short statements, and then you let the commentators flesh it out. This one, of course, we have, I said, several translation, and we have some commentaries that we should do. And also, it's a kind of, Nagarjuna has a, a certain kind of logic. This, it all follows a certain pattern. It's not this, it's not that, it's not both, it's not neither. So you apply that principle to this, then you apply it to that, and you apply it to that. But the general idea is that you can't really say too much about anything without contradicting yourself. And hence, discourse is merely conventional, merely language games of one kind or another, as Wittgenstein would say 1800 years later. But that's what Nagarjuna is saying, that language is basically merely a convention. And that conventional language and the conventional concepts are obstructing us from seeing reality as it really is. Well, let's dedicate merit, and then we'll see reality as it is, and I'll see you all either on Sunday or next week. By this merit, may all obtain omniscience. May it defeat the enemy wrongdoing. From the stormy wave of birth, old age, sickness, and death. From the ocean of samsara, may it free all beings.
Thank you, Bruce.
Thank you, Bruce.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Good to see you all.
Good to see you. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Bye.